Welcome to Fear and Greed, the Sunday edition. It's the 26th of September 2021 and I'm Sean Aylmer. This is our Sunday show where we have a bit of a change of pace and we look at some of our favourite stories for the week. As always, I'm joined by the Fear and Greed team. Adamski, Adam Lang, good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Mickey T, Michael Thompson, a regular voice on the podcast nowadays. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Michael, I know you love to jump in with reviews. Did we get any this week?
We had a cracking review from a listener called Seth, who is a fan of the Sunday show. And he writes, "It's like the insight section of the newspaper if the paper could talk and have a debate. 5 stars. And look, that got me thinking, and I was very grateful for the 5 stars. That's very nice. But it made me wonder what parts of the paper we are. And I figured that, Sean, you're obviously the business section. I'm probably the classifieds because I'm a bit light on detail sometimes.
Well, no. The classifieds has to be a Adamski, doesn't it?
Well, I was thinking Adam would perhaps be the crossword because there's very strict rules around it. It's the one that looks most like a spreadsheet, but the thing that goes against it is I've never heard Adam give a one-word answer.
Oh, I like it.
Thanks.
I don't know whether they still have them, I must admit. The share tables. Don't you think, Adam, it'd be more share tables? It's structured. It's precise.
Well, now you're verging on flattery.
There's just lots and lots of numbers on it. Seth, thank you for the review and the 5 stars. That's great. I'm not sure, Michael, you play yourself down. I think you'd be kind of like the long-form journalism. The more you read, the more you listen to, the more you find out. I think Adam would be the front page, really, like kind of on the money, know what's going on. I'm probably a bit more ponderous than that. Maybe arts and entertainment or someone like that. I don't know.
You're the comics.
The comics. Look, let's kick things off. Adam, what a week for Melbourneites.
It's been extraordinary, Sean, hasn't it? If the Melbourne lockdown ends as planned on October the 26th, Melbourne will have spent 267 days in hard lockdown since March last year. Now, collectively, that's nearly 9 months, and at that point, it would become the most locked down city in the world. So rounding out the top 5 will be Argentina's Buenos Aires in second, then Dublin, then London, and then Prague. So what a week in Melbourne too. We saw daily lockdown protests and some really ugly scenes. Then, if that wasn't enough, there was an earthquake on Wednesday. Then on Friday, John Elliott, one of Melbourne's most well-known business identities, passed away, and I must say our thoughts go out to Tom Elliott and the rest of the grieving family. And yesterday was the second AFL Grand Final not to be held at the MCG. So Brisbane hosted last year and then Perth yesterday. So it's not just the game itself, but a whole week of great, fun AFL activity and business that Melbourne has missed now twice.
Now, Adam, you are so precise on everything. Where was the 1991 AFL Grand Final played?
Geez, Sean, I don't know.
Because you said it was the second game not to be hosted at the MCG, which technically is not correct. It's the third.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway.
So looking ahead, the Melbourne Cup is due to be held on Tuesday, the 2nd of November. And at this point, Premier Daniel Andrews is aiming to have 80% of the state's eligible population fully vaccinated, which would leave the door open for crowds at the track. So, Sean, given everything that's happened, how important is having crowds at the Melbourne Cup this year?
Given everything that's happened, not very, unless you're missing out yourself. Now, have you guys been to the Melbourne Cup or any Derby Day or any of the carnival down there and hung around the birdcage and things like that?
I have.
Yeah, it is great fun. Like Melbourne is a party city, I reckon, from about late October through to the end of the Australian Open tennis. And there is no better city in the country than Melbourne in that whole summer period. It starts with the horse racing. It pushes into the cricket season, into the tennis season. They have lots of festivals. It really is quite incredible. Your question was, does it matter that there's not a crowd at the Melbourne Cup? Of course it doesn't at the end of the day because COVID is such a crisis and we need to get to the end of it, or at least to get it to acceptable and reasonable levels so that we can all live a somewhat normal life. But, next year I think it should be the biggest Melbourne Cup ever. They should absolutely, bust the seams at Flemington, and Melbourne should celebrate for 3 months next year post-COVID because it is such a wonderful town, and the Melbourne Cup is such a wonderful event.
Michael, how are you seeing it?
Well, I think that the lack of crowds at the Melbourne Cup deprive us of one of the greatest joys of the year. And it may not be one that either of you two have experienced. On Melbourne Cup Day night on Channel 9, A Current Affair do a special feature where they send a reporter, and it's always Martin King. Every year he goes there, and it is 10 minutes of him interviewing progressively drunker punters. And it is 10 minutes of people thinking they can sing, of people thinking they can dance, of people thinking that they are hilarious. And it is the greatest 10 minutes of TV that you will see all year. So while ever there aren't crowds at the Melbourne Cup, we are being deprived of that.
Australia at our best.
It certainly is, yes. It's a secret shame that's no longer so secret.
I've never actually seen that on A Current Affair on the night of, because often sort of in previous jobs and that we've been fortunate enough to be in some of those places, and God, it's good fun.
You're one of them, Sean?
I have not. Actually, I must say I was once working at Fairfax at the time, and I had just ducked down for the day, and the CEO of the company rang me because something had happened on the day, and I had just gotten out of the taxi or whatever, and I was walking into Flemington, talking to the CEO, sort of hoping that he didn't realise I was actually at the races. So, you just sort of, I was slightly uncomfortable doing it, and the guys with the bugles just started blasting away right next to me as I'm trying to have this serious conversation with the CEO of the company, and he said, Sean, you're at the races? And yeah, I am. That's fair enough. Maybe we should talk about this tomorrow. Yeah, maybe. And that was that. Hey, Waverley Park, by the way, 91 AFL Grand Final.
Okay, yep, fair, good call.
Now, the other thing, Adam, you were talking about the return of kids to sport. That's something that's close to your heart.
Oh, very much. And look, nearly half of Australia has been locked down at various times, and so I'm guessing even if you haven't been through lockdown, you can certainly empathise with this. And if you've been in lockdown, you really will. So at the end of October, we are hoping to see the start of children returning to school in New South Wales and Victoria, especially in Sydney and Melbourne. In New South Wales, community sport can only happen if it complies with gathering rules. So that rules out team sports at the moment. In Victoria, pretty much the same thing. So we haven't really got a clear line of sight nor a goal about when community sport might come back into the frame. So given the various coping mechanisms that around half of Australians have had to develop to get through lockdown, I think the return of community sport is the next big thing that I'm looking forward to, the physical and the mental health improvements through being able to play and socialise through sport. And there's a lot of businesses that can really gain from this. So as we head toward the target of 80% of eligible people being vaccinated, I'm looking for a target date, a goal that we can work toward as to when we can start getting community sport back into our calendars. Michael, are you with me?
Look, I can agree with you on the importance of community sport. My kids are a bit too young for community sport. For me, the big kind of thing will be the start of term 4 and a likely return to preschool, which will be a pretty big kind of milestone. But the big thing that I'm holding on to is really just the idea of being able to have a family Christmas. That it seems like a long way away, but as we've seen, the unexpected can happen, and you just hope that we continue on the path that we're on, and that we do hit the vaccination milestones that we get to, because a family Christmas essentially means crossing state borders. And I'm kind of holding on to that as being the thing that is really the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's a great goal, Sean.
Well, I kind of agree, but I have like no school sport and no community sport on the weekends. So as you know, I have many children, and most of them play at least 2 sports. So my weekends, particularly during school terms, there's school sport on Saturday and there's club sport on Sunday. And for me to have 4 or 5 games of sport on a day is not unusual.
Ugh.
I'm kind of liking this whole lockdown, and I feel sorry for the kids, and they need to. And yeah, you're probably right, Adam. But there is an upside of not driving kids around all the time.
All right, so I've won neither of you with this one.
No. I mean, I think you are right. I just think it's worth mentioning the vaccination rate. So where we're at now, the national rate's almost 50, or it's around 50%. And that's for the fully vaccinated. And for the first dose, it's heading towards 75%. If you take New South Wales, because apart from the ACT, I think it's the best in terms of vaccination rates, and it's at 84% for the first dose and 57% or thereabouts for fully vaccinated. What I think is really encouraging about that, and these are some of these protesters we saw during the week and the anti-vaxxers and that, New South Wales, which is probably typical, if it's at 84, 85% one jab, even if you get a loss of people going for their second jab for whatever reason, it looks like we will achieve that 80% target. Now, if you go to the US, that's fully vaccination rates in the US, I think, is low 60s. Notwithstanding all the noise about it and how well it's done, it's low 60s. Singapore is 82%, and that's the golden child around the globe at the moment. It's just really, really encouraging, I think, that 84% of New South Welshmen have had the first dose, because it does mean that, all things being equal, the country will hit that 80% rate sometime before Christmas, allowing you, Michael, to head down to the ACT and enjoy Christmas.
I wonder what do you think it is that's led to us getting such high rates? Is it that we're a compliant bunch, or is it the fact that really Australians have been deprived of a lot because of the lockdowns that other countries haven't really endured in the same way, so that suddenly we can see the enormous benefits of being vaccinated?
Maybe this goes back to your point, Adam. When you are the most locked down city in the world and the way out of that is vaccination, then you've got a far greater incentive to do that. And that's where Melbourne stands. Sydney during the week had its 90th day of continual lockdown. So Sydney siders are keen to get vaccinated as well. Maybe that's just the sort of unintended consequence and potentially benefit of these harsh lockdowns.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely to do with being locked down. And finally, we've got supply. So It seems that we can, for anyone that wants to be vaccinated, you can get it, or at least you can get those bookings in.
Now, when you're in lockdown, some of us put on a few kilos, some of us drink too much. Michael, I'm not sure I'm thinking about you for this one. I know you got very excited about the story on craft beer this week.
I absolutely did, because I'm a fan of craft beer, like a lot of people are these days. And it's why it was probably one of my favourite stories this week, about the proposed purchase of craft beer company Fermentum by, well, really a giant in the industry, Lion. The deal's worth more than $500 million, but it does need the approval of the ACCC first. So Fermentum, the best known brand there would be Stone and Wood. Sean, you've had it, I would imagine?
I have had Stone and Wood. Is it a craft beer? Is that what you're going to ask?
Well, no, I'm not going to ask, because I'm just going to tell you the answer. It was a craft beer, and it has been probably one of the main beers within the craft beer industry. Arguably, it's no longer a craft beer because it is being purchased by a multinational corporation. And that's really what the ACCC is kind of looking at. Because there's been a lot of purchases by Lion and by Carlton and United Breweries over recent years. They've bought dozens of craft beer brands. They're now looking at, in relation to the Fermentum purchase and the Stone and Wood purchase, is kind of really, what is a craft beer? What is the competition within the industry like? Whether any of these other smaller beers are able to expand to fill that gap. But really, for me, there's another twist to the story, and this is the part that I find really, really fascinating. The founders of Stone and Wood have been huge advocates of independent brewing for a number of years. They've been really kind of leaders within the industry, and they've actually been quite critical in the past of other craft breweries selling to the giants. Back in 2017, one of those founders said that any brewery who uses the loyalty of their customers to cash in their chips breaks the trust of the people who support them. And so you can imagine now Stone and Wood have been absolutely hammered by their usually loyal supporters. So I was curious just to get your thoughts on it, that Adam, I think it's entirely fair that they should be able to sell, and good on them for kind of building the business to that level that they're able to fetch what is a pretty spectacular price for it. But maybe there's a bit of a lesson there about being too vocal and too idealistic early on in the business before they're actually at the point of selling up themselves.
Oh, look, good on them for building a great business that has appeal and can be sold. I think it's terrific. Obviously, some of their former statements are held in high question now, and that's righteous too. So, yeah, they just shouldn't have spoken in that way. I don't think it just reeks of and looks like hypocrisy when it comes around to the time they do want to sell. But then there's that question that comes into my mind, having worked in pubs to pay my way through university and a bit beyond. I love a pub. And there was always this debate about, does it taste better out of the tap or through a bottle or a can? And so, I think some of their fans, some of the Stone and Wood real aficionados might be looking for, is the taste going to change?
Well, they always insist that it doesn't.
They do.
I'll be willing to test
Sample.
it extensively. I'll do kind of some before and after testing and willing to volunteer.
One thing I would say, there was a guy called Scott Ellis who I worked with at the Herald many years ago, and it was a leap year, so I'm guessing it was like 2012 or thereabouts. He decided to drink a different style of beer every day. And I know it was a leap year because it was 366 different beers he needed.
Gee, that's impressive.
Yeah, and so every day, but once he got to the sort of 200 or, probably a bit beyond that, he really found it difficult to find a different beer.
Okay.
So, in fact, those of us that worked at the Sydney Morning Herald at the time were in search of craft beers and different styles of beers. And I remember there's some in the Inner West suddenly popped up, and there was like an Indian pale ale and a pale ale and an extra pale ale. So there were 3 extra ones for him. And what nowadays, though, there are hundreds and hundreds, and I've seen the number, I just can't bring it to mind, but close to 1,000 different craft beers. And in that 10 years since Scott did his little project, it is amazing how many different styles of beer have emerged in Australia. And of course, what that has meant is that the 4Xs and VBs and Tooheys Dry have proportionately lost a lot of customage. And so, everyone's drinking craft beers. An interesting one is Carlton Draft, which sort of was able to reinvent itself as a workers' beer with a little bit of a craft style to it. Carlton Draft is just a bit better than what you might than VB or Tooheys or something like that. So it's been a really interesting industry, the beer industry, over the last 10 years, and it'd be quite easy to probably have 2 different styles of beer every day for a year, which is something, Michael, you perhaps could try.
Yes, Scott Ellis is my new inspiration.
Yeah. Now, Sean, before we move on, did Scott have a winner?
The loser was his liver.
Well, but Scott was not, you might think someone who's drinking beer every day, you could picture them. Scott wasn't. Scott was a fit guy. He was just, he was doing it for the sake of the science, perhaps, or something like that. Hey, look, I got to talk about acronyms.
Oh.
And I know I'm going to bring Michael into this one. One I heard this week that it's been around for 8 years or something was MICTA, which is some sort of agreement between M's Mexico, I's Indonesia, K's Korea, T is Turkey, and the A, believe it or not, is Australia. So apparently we have great relations with Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, and Turkey. MICTA put out its second statement ever this week, which suggests to me it's a total waste of time. And then we have Michael AUKUS. Do you like that one?
Yeah, I'm a fan of AUKUS. I'm a fan of pretty much any acronym, really. And I think that this was a pretty spectacular week because I learnt something from you, Sean. Well, I mean,
that's why it's spectacular. You actually learnt something from me.
It was learning about MICTA, and that is going to come up at a pub trivia night at some point. You can be sure of it. And it may well be a jackpot question, I suspect, and I will know it now thanks to you. But, I mean, we've had AUKUS, we had the Quad being talked about, we had Five Eyes being talked about, bunch of other multilateral organisations. MICTA was a real standout for me, and I thought it was a bit of an odd grouping. I wasn't really kind of sure what they all have in common. I did a bit of research. They're all members of the G20 and they're all in that middle power range. And then that apparently sparks a debate whether Australia should be called a middle power or a top 20 nation, which is a very, very dull debate to be having. But anyway, I thought I would share instead with you my favourite regional grouping from all of my research into acronyms and multilateral organisations.
Go on.
It's better than AUKUS. It is better than MICTA. It is SARLAWLUX, which is a group of 5 regional authorities in Europe: Saarland, Lorraine, and Luxembourg. It is, again, a really useless piece of trivia. It is a slippery slope because from there you end up at the Pacific pumas, the Asian tigers, and the not particularly catchy BIMSTEC, which is in South and Southeast Asia.
Oh, jeez.
Adam, can you ever have too many acronyms?
Yeah, I'm breaking out in a rash as we speak.
Excellent.
I don't want to actually take anything you're saying seriously, Michael, but I'm going to pick you up on something. Is Australia a top 20 or a middle power? Do you know what's happened this week? We've become one because the alliance with the UK and the US around nuclear subs is as much strategic as anything else. The quad grouping with Japan and India and the US is totally strategic. Scott Morrison this week came out and said he'd be sharing millions of vaccines with poorer nations in our region. And as part of the Quad arrangement, we are responsible for distributing vaccines to the poorer nations. Our economy isn't a middle power, right? It's less than middle power outside commodities, to be honest. But everything else, we're pretty much a middle power. However, strategically, because where we sit in the world, we are a middle power and becoming increasingly important. The US wants to look at Indo-Pacific region, we're its greatest ally in the area, so we are actually a middle power. Too serious for a Sunday?
No, it makes sense. I think now we've put what I said was going to be a pretty dull debate. I think we've actually just put that to bed permanently. Australia is now officially a middle power, according to Sean Aylmer. Well done.
Keeping things interesting, carbon neutrality. Sometimes I see that and you think, oh my God, yet another story about the road to carbon neutrality by 2050. However, it is a really important story, and this week a lot happened in that area. And I think the biggest one was Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, and even Barnaby Joyce, the Nationals leader, who has a group of supporters who aren't necessarily great friends of the climate debate. They've both come out, and Josh Frydenberg particularly, saying 2050 carbon neutrality, it's necessary for Australia to achieve that. What did you think, Adam?
Well past time, well past due. Very glad to hear it coming, and I think it just feels like indicative of sniffing the political wind and going, there is no point in fighting this anymore. We have to deliver it.
We don't have an election coming up next year. Do we by any chance? And a climate conference between now and then?
Remarkable, but we do.
Maybe. Well, I mean, it was interesting. AGL Energy came out and said that it was closing its Mount Piper power station in New South Wales earlier in the 2028-29 financial year. Its Yallourn power station in Victoria is closing in 2024. The thing that we do forget sometimes, without power stations, we may not actually be able to turn the lights on. And so where the rubber hits the road is when you're having blackouts, of course. So there's still a little bit of way to go there, but it's a really interesting debate.
So we've heard the Prime Minister talk about we don't need to know a target so much as need to know how we're going to get there. I think that's a critical thing about having a target is you then move into how you're going to get there. And I think that's absolutely doable. It's just about applying the right minds to it and the right dedication. So along a political timeline, I'm guessing that plan will be made evident during the course of the election campaign.
I suppose the contrast to that, and we're seeing this in the annual general meeting season that's coming up in the next couple of months and the resolutions going out, there's a lot more talk about climate change, but where the climate change activists are really making a noise is making sure that the company they're talking about, might be AGL Energy, it might be the Commonwealth Bank, not just says they're going to do it, but shows how they're going to do it. And I think that's an interesting twist that's come in the last, even this year, maybe the last couple of years. People actually want to know how Australia is going to hit climate neutrality by 2040 or 2050 or whatever date it is, just like they want to know how Commonwealth Bank or BHP or AGL Energy will hit those targets by a certain date. It's not just about saying it, it's actually about outlining the road to Damascus.
Sean, I think that's exactly the point of having the goal, is then working out how you're going to get there. And I think we saw something very similar in terms of vaccinations. Knowing that we had a target of 70% of eligible people getting vaccinations and then 80% and then more, that our lockdown freedoms would be tied to that. I think that's a direct input into why many, many people are getting vaccinated now. And I think this is the same sort of thing that business has been looking for, the Australian population has been looking for, to know what we're doing on climate change and how we can help, how we can get there.
Fair enough. Look, we've nearly made it to the end of the show, Adamski, and Mickey T has not had a gripe yet.
Well, no, I'm not necessarily going to have a gripe
about not having a gripe.
I'm not going to have a gripe every week. It's not as well, actually, I am going to have a gripe. What am I saying? Today, this is one that's been bothering me this week. It's a fairly new issue, and it's one that actually came up last week. Delivery times.
Oh, Australia Post?
Oh, give him a break.
I'm not just talking about Australia Post. I'm talking about a whole range of companies. And actually, you know what? Even as I'm saying this, there is a voice in my head that is saying, abort, abort. You're going to sound really entitled.
So go on, Michael. Go on. I'm interested in what you've got to say.
Well, okay. So Star Trek drivers, which is an Australia Post business, went on strike for 24 hours this week, and that was over job security and the use of external contractors. FedEx drivers have also voted to strike. My gripe is not actually with either of them because my issue didn't really involve either of them. I just needed to mention it to make it relevant to business. But this week, my order of coffee beans sat in a depot 10 kilometres from my house for 7 days before they made the last mile delivery to me.
That is desperate, Michael.
I feel sorry for the retailers that are copping the blame for blowouts in delivery times, but most of all, I feel sorry for me being forced into Nescafe Blend 43.
Now, Michael, did you watch your depleting supply of beans with greater anxiety the lower it got?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, dear.
Oh, sorry. I need to interrupt. Nescafe Blend 43. I mean, buy Moccona. Like, you're buying coffee beans. Obviously, you're somewhat of a coffee snob, and you've gone from
international
top
roast
shelf to – that's right.
Well, okay, to be fair, I had 2 kilos of coffee beans sitting there in a depot a couple of k's away. I'm not going to go and buy another kilo of beans that's going to last me like a week.
Did you think
when
about
I
it?
suspect that it's going to arrive any day.
But if you're buying crap coffee, you might as well buy the best crap coffee, not the worst crap coffee.
No, this was coffee that I dug out of the back of the cupboard.
Oh, right.
It's the in case of emergency break glass coffee. That's and this counted as an emergency. So there we go.
So I totally disagree. I think the delivery drivers of the world, and certainly in my region, in my state, around the country, are doing a magnificent job. They have never been busier. I don't mind if they have 24 hours off to actually push on conditions and pay. And these guys are coming and knocking on the door and facing up to people. They don't know what they're going to see in terms of COVID and that. Good on them. And obviously, a lot of like Australia Post, wasn't it? They had hundreds of workers are actually off or in isolation because of COVID concerns. So love your gripe, Michael. Totally disagree.
Oh, I'm not going to get into a debate about it, but...
Yes.
But most delivery drivers these days are doing contactless delivery, so they're not actually coming into contact with most people. And my gripe is not about the delivery drivers themselves. It is about the companies that are perhaps not putting on enough drivers or not preparing for what is a pretty obvious surge in demand that has now been surging for the last 18 months, 2 years. We shouldn't be in this position of waiting 8 to 9 to 10 days for coffee beans.
And when they park their trucks across the driveways and you're riding on the footpaths with your kids on a bike, knocking over pedestrians, their trucks are in the way. Is that what you're trying to say?
Sean, I don't like the direction that we're going here, and I'm not a fan of your tone.
I think that might be time to wrap this up, I think. Adamski, thank you. Are you doing anything on this fine day?
Yes, Sean, we are having a permitted gathering as a family. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Fantastic. What about you, Mickey?
I'll be drinking my coffee beans.
They're not coffee beans. Have they arrived yet?
They have arrived,
right.
and it was...
Whew, what a relief.
It was quite a relief. It was a first world problem resolved.
Fantastic.
Drinking your coffee beans as the bitterness drifts away.
Oh, very nice. Enjoy your days. That's it for this morning, Sunday the 26th of September 2021. Michael, Adam, thanks for being part of it.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
Michael and I will be back tomorrow morning with a regular edition of Fear and Greed. Enjoy your Sunday.